If you're enjoying the Health Geeks Book Club podcast, we'd appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, leave a like, rating, or review, whichever your preferred podcatcher platform allows.
This episode is sponsored by Well Balanced Nutrition and 360 Health.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Good day, everybody. This is Eleanor from the Health Geeks Book Club podcast, and I just really want to keep talking about smell. And this book we read called Nosedive. Kristen, can you hang with me a little longer?
Just remember, Eleanor, she who smelt it dealt it.
Wow. Oh, in that case, let me refer to Ben Franklin, because Ben has a little quote about that, and I have it, I think, right here. Where is Ben's comment? Oh, on 99, page 99. I can find this really quick for you guys. Dealt it, smelt it? Maybe not. Yes, he says, my prize question, therefore, should be to discover some drug, wholesome and not disagreeable, to be mixed with our common food or sauces, and render the natural discharges of wind from our bodies not only inoffensive but agreeable as perfumes. That this is not a chemical project and altogether impossible may appear from these considerations, that we already have some knowledge of means capable of varying that smell. He that dines on the stale flesh, especially with much addition of onions, shall be able to afford a stink that no company can tolerate, while he that has lived some time on vegetables only shall have that breath so pure as to be insensible to most delicate noses. And if he can manage so as to avoid the report, he may anywhere give vent to his griefs unnoticed.
Oh, my goodness.
So now there, Kristen, there's another reason you want to be a vegetarian. You will have vents of grief unnoticed. Whereas Tim eating his beef with those sauces.
I'm a delight to be around. Let's go.
Yeah, so when you want to know what those smells might be, there's a sulfuric gas in the rapid release of gases from the colon, and that's what we're smelling, also called the fart. Yeah, how's that a good way to open a podcast?
That's twice on this podcast, not this episode, but on this podcast that she said fart.
She said fart.
I'm just getting where the language can be interpreted by others. Because when we talk about lactones and methionol and sulfuraldehydes, it's not quite as understandable.
That's true.
Yeah,
right.
So. But how about
Did
pee?
You
want to talk about pee?
Sulfur oxide? No, man, I farted.
Well, here it smells of pee. Here's another thing we can talk about. Because, in health, we have to void frequently. And if we don't, we're more apt to have bacterial infections, right? So
right.
Peeing is a good thing. And if we're going to drink all that water they want us to drink every day, we're going to be doing that. So
you got to make room.
Yeah. So here's a chart, changeable urine. Urine is nearly microbe free. But once it leaves our body, the bacteria start working on it. And that's when the smells start hitting it. One notable urine volatile is the multi-ring steroid molecule androstenone, which we'll encounter in pigs and pork, in which men excrete more than women. Due apparently to genetic differences, the smell receptors from one person to another, some people can't smell androstenone, while among those who can, some describe it as musky and urinous and pleasantly flowery. So we're thinking, did Harold McGee use the gas chromatograph, the instrument that detects these molecules, or did one of these really sensitive noses tell him that's pleasant? Because I don't think an instrument's going to tell you it's pleasant smelling. No. I think you ask people, sniff this, what do you smell there? And some of these noses can say, well, I've picked up sweet coconut peach because there are lactones in there, or it smells a little bit like a potato, or popcorn or basmati rice, vanilla, horse stable.
Okay, can you imagine
fecal sketol
being approached? Would you be in this research study where someone passes gas underwater and you get to smell what that is? I think that's how they captured it, too.
That's up there with dog food taster.
Yeah.
Yeah, because how do they know that dog food tastes the way they say they do?
Well, you were talking about asparagus, and so he says in here, our foods and drinks can affect the smell of fresh urine. Some, like garlic and coffee, contribute their own volatiles. A more complex and notorious example is asparagus, whose influence has intrigued learned physicians and others at least since medieval times. So we're in here with some great minds, pursuing this. Right. Marcel Proust or Proust, however you say his name, was unusually appreciative. His narrator in The Search of Lost Times recalls asparagus as delightful creatures who had fun turning themselves into vegetables, whose precious essence I would recognize when, all night long after a dinner at which I had eaten them, then played with their poetic and coarse joking as a fairy comedy of Shakespeare, a changing my chamber pot into a vase of perfume.
Yeah.
Not everyone notices a change in that. Recent studies indicate that some people don't excrete a stinky sulfur volatile after eating asparagus, and some people aren't able to smell them when they do. Genetic differences in metabolism and olfactory receptors are likely to account for variations.
Isn't that interesting? And people used to think, something's wrong with me when I eat asparagus. I shouldn't eat that anymore. Mm-hmm. But it's fine.
Just find out who you're eating it with. Fine. Can you smell this? Oh, fine. Let's have dinner.
Yeah. Or, for men, we stand next to each other in a stall when we go to the restroom in restaurants. So what you're saying is I wouldn't eat asparagus. So if the guy next to me had, asparagus and I do not get along.
It's so good.
Yes, no, it's not. Right. I don't like the flavor and I don't like the after effects. But if I'm standing there and going, dude, did you have asparagus? And why, yes, I did. Why? Can you smell it? And this is hypothetical. I didn't have this conversation, but so there's a chance that he doesn't smell it,
right?
But I do.
That's the way I interpret it.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I do like my pee smell when I've had coffee. Mm-hmm. That reminds me of Sugar Smacks.
There you go. You're picking up on one of those molecules.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a pleasant one. And that's what he's saying. It's a chord. It's not just one smell. It is this combination of these volatiles that give that characteristic smell. So when you walk into your kitchen, or let's say you're cooking and somebody hits the front door and they go, oh, that smells so good. Yeah. Home feels good because of that smell. But those are those volatiles just escaping. And your little nose knows how to pick up on them because they're not going to stay there forever. They're going to go away. They're not there forever. He has a chart on some smells of giant water bug scent glands. I thought that was an interesting chart. Do people eat giant water bugs? Yes, they do, evidently.
Yeah, not in this country.
Yeah, I don't think so anyway. And there's a whole bunch of people called flavor chemists. And so by knowing what these volatiles are, they can synthetically make chemicals to put in things that give us a smell.
Yes.
So about the animal, I know I like this book better than Kristen, so I'm blabbing. You'll have to get the hook and tell me to be quiet for a minute. When he starts the human animal, he quotes Aristotle in the Problemata, and I think you all will like this one. He says, "Why is it that those who have sexual intercourse or are capable of it have an evil odor and what is called a goat smell, whereas children do not? Why has the armpit a more unpleasant odor than any other part of the body? Why is it that mouths of those who have eaten nothing but are fasting have a stronger odor, the smell of fasting, as it would be called?" Now, this is like 300 BC or whatever. These are the same questions we have today. I mean, you notice it, right? And I heard we talked about the foreign affairs that are going on right now in Ukraine, and there are a lot of people being packed into very small places, even without places to sit down, without bathroom facilities. And there's going to be a smell there. And how people can tolerate that, and what does it irritate them? Because some of these molecules are irritants, and when you get a nerve tissue irritation, you know what happens to the rest of your brain. You're going to be firing off stress chemicals. You're going to be firing off antagonistic.
That's what was missing in the book that I was kind of expecting. Like, how does smell relate to everything else going on in the body? How exactly does smell trigger emotions? And maybe, people with migraines are sensitive to smells and fragrances. And how does that happen? So I was sad that I didn't get to learn that.
I don't know what to say about that.
But anyway,
there's
a lot in here.
He sort of solves the problem of the armpits because he goes and he puts some charts to it. So in the armpit, you might smell vinegar and cheesy because there's some acetic acids and propionic acids that are being excreted. Now, why is that? Because the sweat glands and the skin is very interesting. It's our largest organ, and we have sweat glands, but we also have these other kinds of glands, sebaceous glands, and they make different kinds of products. The sweat gland makes a watery product. The sebaceous gland makes a waxy product. And then you have the way the product is secreted. It's either secreted as a fluid through the cell wall, or part of the cell breaks off, or the whole cell sloughs off. And so when you have these cellular materials being deposited on the top of the skin, that allows our surface microbiome to start working on it. And when it starts breaking down those cell products, they generate these different molecules, and they're giving us these cheesy, vinegary, sweaty feet, rancid smells that we're all, accustomed to. But there's also grapefruit, tropical fruit, and onion smells that come out of there because of the compounds that these bacteria are breaking up. So the basic recipe for armpit sweat is touches of vinegar, cheese, metal, mushrooms, rancid goat, meat, grapefruit, and onions. Isn't that rich? And variable from person to person. Listeners, did you need to know that today?
Producer Tim did not need to know that today.
All right, so what does that have to do with health and wellness? Well, don't we use a lot of deodorants and a lot of fragrances to cover up that smell?
I use an antiperspirant as opposed to a deodorant. Deodorant doesn't do anything for me, but antiperspirant
stops it. It stops the secretion. But with those, you have to be careful about the chemicals. So, and again, the skin is a very absorptive organ. So when we think about, okay, we don't like these smells, but if I smell like grapefruit and fruit, I'm okay. But the other thing is the attraction of odors, particularly in the well, how do I start this off? Sexual intercourse thing, So that attraction is, smell oriented in a big way that people, I don't know that they appreciate. But we try to cover up all these smells, and I don't, as a health advocate, part of what we do at 360 Health is to recommend products that do not have synthetics or toxins or chemical additives that would maybe not be healthy for us. And that's what we're paying attention to, is what are we absorbing through our skin. So when we are trying to modulate these smells, we may be actually introducing into our skin, into our bodies, carcinogenic, toxic materials. So one of the podcasts we were talking about cultural differences in foods. I think there's a big cultural difference in how people react to smell. And I would say Americans are smell avoidant, and we have to have nice smelling things. We don't think clean is clean unless it smells like pine,
And pine,
which are just
clean does not have a smell, right?
That's what I always say, and so do my friends that recommend the products I recommend. And we have just adapted because someone has decided that, hey, I'm a chemist and I know how to make a smell, and I can put it in a product. And I tell you that if you smell, that's bad. And so now I have a product to fix that, and you need to buy it. So it becomes a commercial economic thing. Whereas we just said, I noticed that smell. I know what that's nice or it's not, or I'm going to just step away from it behaviorally. We might be a little healthier. So in the blue zones where we were looking at how people are living their lives, they didn't use a lot of those kinds of deodorants or cleaning products. They used water.
And I think he talks a lot about it with the different smells, like the difference between the grandmas that he had. One grandma was kind of a healthy eater, healthy cooker, and she smelled that way. And then another, I don't remember, she smelled maybe of Indian cooking or something like that, which just two totally different smells, and then he relates. I don't know where I was going with that, but just that the natural smells based on our lifestyle that we choose, that's going to affect it too, the microbes, but also the things that are in our environment.
I share a story about garlic. When I was a young married person living in New York, very culturally diverse area, my husband went out with the guys one night and came in about 3 a.m, and he hit the front door, and our bedroom was considerably far away from the front door. It woke me up. I was, what happened? And he reeks of garlic. And he had been to a Jewish restaurant that served a really heavy garlic gravy with big old cloves, and he had sucked that stuff down, and it was just coming out every pore on his body. Gosh. It took him 2 days, and it was. But in that culture, probably, and if I had eaten the garlic, I wouldn't have noticed it. That idea of what it comes out off of your body is what you're putting in your body, part of it, and then what microbes you got on the outside, and your genetics. So he had a chapter in here about limiting body odors east and west, and he was talking about the barbarian stench. Asian people emit far fewer goaty, meaty, oniony volatiles than Europeans do. It's evident from historical documents that when the Chinese first encountered travelers from the West, they were shocked and repelled by their smell. In medieval Tang China, which had regular contact with people from Central Asia and India, strong body odor was called hu chow, barbarian stench, because hu could mean fox animals noted for their smelliness, and wild fables were told of fox people from foreign lands who hid in their telltale smell with perfumes, so they could disguise themselves with perfumes. This is a neat book, if you get into some of the detail of it. But now, what does that have to do with our health? Like I'm saying, it's. I'm worried about the exposures, and he has a section in here actually about after he gets through the plants and the animals, which I could find lots of fun things to talk about in there too, and so I will. One of them, I have Tim. Your name's next to this one. And it was where he was talking about nosedive into Scotch whiskeys.
Oh, yeah.
You want to hear about those?
Sure.
Okay, how's that related to health?
To my health. Cheers.
Yeah, I think we said a little bit of alcohol is not unhealthy, right? I've come to love some of the unlikely tokens of the natural cycle, not the predictable, equitable, aquatic edibles, but a handful of Scotch whiskeys. Here's the connection. Ocean waves and kelp release bromine and brominated carbon chains into the atmosphere, where they're transported great distances by winds and eventually return to the earth in rainfall and snow. Most of the bromine compounds that fall on the land end up washed into rivers and back to the ocean. So in this smell thing, he weaves in this natural cycle of, what's the cosmic thing and where is our place in the universe. And here he's showing that the peat bogs formed by sphagnum mosses in the northern hemisphere and the waterlogged bogs are where we're getting the water that percolates through these things. And so the peat beds can be thousands of years old and have long been cut, dried, and burned for fuel. Some producers of Scotch whiskey dry their malted barley with burning peat. Some of that peat can be especially rich in bromophenols, and some of those bromophenols make it through fermentation and distillation and into the bottle. So it is at the home of San Francisco, or whether I'm traveling 1,000 miles inland, I can sniff an evening dram of Lagavulin. Do you know that Scotch?
I don't.
And savor a touch of the ocean, its animals and the weeds and the long reach. Now, when you are experiencing a whiskey that way, that's got to be soothing. That's got to be relaxing. That's got to be doing something very good for your chemical environment inside.
It's a very mindful way to eat and drink.
Which is what we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. And, when we talk about foods or we talk about just where are we now, just to be mindful. This is where I am right now. How am I relating to my environment? And it's very calming. Mm-hmm. And that decreases the cortisol releases and keeps the sympathetic nervous system at bay a little bit.
I had marked, speaking of mindfulness, it's something that I talk about a lot, mindful eating, and I marked this page 596.
Oh.
Just questions to ask yourself. when you stop and notice the smells around you, what does it remind you of? Why does it intrigue you? And what memories or emotions is it evoking right now? Whether it's the smell that reminds you of your grandma's skin, or the whiskey that you're drinking, or the flowers that you're smelling, stop and notice. I think that's my favorite part about this book, is it invites you to do that.
I agree. I was talking about exposures to deodorants and things you put on your skin. I was saddened when I was reading in here about when you're cooking and the exposures that people get. And I didn't know if you all had run across this before. He says, appetizing though it may be that the aldehydes they are well known to be toxic to airway cells, and they contribute to respiratory diseases common among kitchen workers. This problem has been of special concern in China, where even at home, foods may be stir-fried every day with temperatures and techniques that cause airborne droplets of oil to combust spectacularly above the wok. Now, I like to cook with a wok. Do you?
Yep.
Do you do it very frequently?
Not as frequent as I should.
Well, maybe not. They say that the breath of the wok is often celebrated as a signature aroma of excellent stir-frying, but frequent exposure to the oil droplets and high levels of volatiles it generates, among them formaldehyde and other aldehydes, benzene and toluene, is thought to be responsible for the relatively high incidence of lung cancer among Chinese women. You know, they have a low GI and breast cancer rates, but evidently they have high cancer rates.
That's a cultural. And you know, I was talking to my husband, who's a pulmonologist.
Yes.
About COPD, and I said, "Oh, a commercial came on about COPD," and I'm like, "Oh, is it just smoking that often triggers COPD?" And he goes, "Actually, worldwide, the biggest influencer of COPD is cooking over an open fire." So I just thought about the smoke, but then there's a whole different aspect of the
oil droplets and stuff.
Oil droplets.
Yeah, right.
Neat.
Yeah. He has a section here about cooked foods, and I thought for our health and wellness thing that probably was one of my favorite chapters, because I like to cook. And he talks about the differences between grass-fed beef and game meats and grain-fed beef. And one of the things that he talks about is force-feeding birds, castrating hogs, grain-feeding cattle are all venerable versions of a kind of olfactory camouflage, a pre-cooking on the hoof that emphasizes generating fatty smells over the specifically animal and bloody smells. They distance our eating from the smells of animal life and the violence of wounding and ending it. If they help us forget that we are predatory animals taking pleasure in pieces of flesh that prefigure our own end. That's kind of heavy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So that's kind of what he keeps talking about in here is, where are we? What are we? What's our relationship to being, and the universe? The fact that we all are going to return to dust. We've been dust, we'll go back to dust. We'll go back to those starter set of chemicals that he talked about in the beginning of the book. And I think this is a crazy book, and it would be a reference book. I don't know what else to say about it. But there's little nuggets in here that are take-homes to make you think over that whiskey.
Yeah. Yum.
So what are you smelling today?
Well, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to uncork the world, breathe it in, savor it, and think on it, and then log that away for the next time I bump into it.
That sounds awesome.
I did tell you that story about my student, though, whose grandmother died, and she got a bunch of stuff in the mail from Arizona, and when she opened it up, a pillow was in there, and she breathed it in and said, "There's my grandmother."
Oh.
So I hope we all have those kinds of nostalgic, comforting, wonderful experiences with our nose. Don't forget your nose. It's right there in the front of your face. And don't cut it off to spite yourself.
Right. And keep it in your own business.
All right. Oh, yeah, there's another one. And as we read some more of these wellness books, I think I'm going to be looking for ways to tie back to this book. I might have a reference. He did reference the cancer code. I mean, I think he could have referenced the cancer code in here. You know, I always like to look for ways that they connect to other books we've read.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, I am Kristen Norton, one of the registered dietitians at Well Balanced Nutrition. Come visit us at www.wellbalancednutrition.com and hang out with us. It's March, which is National Nutrition Month, and we help people find flavor fast from foods all around the world.
Keep reading with us.
Don't forget to subscribe, like, rate, review on your podcatcher, and you can also listen to Health Geeks Book Club on the Less Desirables Podcast Network, TLDpodnetwork.com.
Oh, and tell us what book you want us to read next.
Yes. The views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.